Subscribe before the truth slips through the cracks. When the Dawsons moved into the old Hartwell property, they thought they were buying peace. The Victorian house on the edge of Stillwater, Maine, had been on the market for over a year, its price slashed so many times that it felt like a steal. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a backyard that opened into dense pine woods. But even on the day they arrived, there was something off about the house. Something that listened. It started small, a clock chiming at 3:17 a.m., even though its batteries had been removed. Footsteps in the upstairs hallway when both parents were downstairs. The family dog, a big, gentle golden retriever named Myro, refusing to go near the study at the end of the hall. Laura Dawson, a high school teacher, tried to explain it away. Old house, she told herself. Settling wood, bad wiring, wind through the vents. But her husband, Tom, wasn't so sure. Tom had served 12 years in the Marines. He wasn't the type to scare easily, but by the 3rd night, he was keeping a baseball bat next to the bed. Their son, 16-year-old Evan, had been complaining about hearing whispering through the wall behind his headboard. Laura thought it was a draft. Tom thought it was rats. But when Evan recorded it on his phone one night, they all sat at the kitchen table the next morning, listening in silence. The sound wasn't scurrying. It wasn't pipes. It was talking, muffled, low, but distinct enough that you could hear fragments. Don't open it. She's still inside. By the end of that week, they called the police. Officer Reynolds from Stillwater PD came by with a flashlight and that small-town smirk people wear when they think you're overreacting. He walked the perimeter, tapped on the drywall, checked the attic, and found nothing but insulation and dust. "Old houses carry sound in funny ways," he said before leaving. "You'd be surprised what travels through vents." 2 nights later, Evan disappeared. His bedroom window was open, curtains blowing in the rain. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the mud below. Only his phone, lying face up on the bed, still recording. The last thing it captured was his voice whispering, "There's someone behind the wall." The search began immediately. The town rallied. Volunteers, police, and local news vans filled the street. For 48 hours, the Dawsons barely slept. Helicopters scanned the woods. Dogs combed the property. They found nothing. On the 3rd day, Laura went back into Evan's room. The police had taped it off, but she didn't care. She sat on the edge of his bed, clutching his hoodie, staring at the wall behind it. She remembered what he'd said, behind the wall. And then she noticed something. The baseboard along that wall was slightly raised, like it had been removed and put back in again. She ran her fingers along it, and her nail caught on something. A seam. Within an hour, Tom had torn half the wallpaper away. Beneath it, they found a narrow outline of what looked like a sealed door, plastered, painted, and covered to blend in. The handle had been removed. When the police returned, Reynolds' face drained of color. "That wasn't on the inspection report," he muttered. They brought in a contractor with a sledgehammer. The air that came out when they broke through was stale, almost chemical. The flashlight beams cut through dust and darkness, revealing a small hidden chamber, no larger than a walk-in closet. The floor was concrete. The walls were lined with torn insulation and faint scribbles in marker. And in the center was a chair, bolted to the ground. A metal folding chair with straps still hanging loose. A few old Polaroids were scattered nearby, faded, water-damaged, and horrifyingly ordinary. Pictures of children, sitting in that same chair, eyes wide, but no visible harm. Laura screamed. Tom grabbed one of the photos and froze. The wallpaper in the background matched their hallway. Police sealed the house again. Forensics moved in. The Dawsons stayed at a hotel. But word spread fast through Stillwater. This house wasn't just haunted by rumor, it had a record. A week later, Detective Abigail Pierce, a seasoned investigator transferred from Augusta, arrived to take over the case. She'd heard whispers about the Hartwell property before, dating back to the late 1980s. "People go missing here," she told Reynolds quietly. "Every decade or so, always a child." But this was different. This time, there was proof, and one missing boy whose last recording placed him inside his own wall. Pierce had the house's previous ownership records pulled. The last family to own it before the Dawsons were the Kellers, a reclusive couple who moved out in 2004 after their teenage daughter vanished. The case had gone cold after 1 week. The girl's name? Rebecca Keller. Her bedroom, it turned out, had been the same room Evan slept in. That night, while investigators cataloged evidence from the hidden room, a rookie officer on the scene called out from the basement, "Detective Pierce, you'll want to see this." Behind the water heater, he'd found another sealed panel, smaller, square, barely visible under a layer of dust. When they pried it open, a rush of cold air escaped. Inside was a compartment filled with VHS tapes, dozens of them, each labeled with a date, years apart. The most recent one, April 12, 2004, Rebecca Keller's disappearance. Pierce ordered the tapes logged and sent to evidence, but curiosity got the better of her. After the techs left, she played one. Static filled the screen for a moment, then the grainy image of that hidden room appeared. The chair, the walls, the faint hum of a ventilation fan, and then a voice behind the camera, male, calm, deliberate. "Tell them your name." A girl's voice trembling, "Rebecca, Rebecca Keller." Pierce froze. The girl was no older than 15. Then the man's voice again. "Good. Now tell them what's behind the walls." Rebecca turned her head slightly, looking past the camera, eyes wide with terror. "Another room, but no one can get in. Not anymore." The screen went black, and just as Pierce leaned closer, the tape flickered back to life, showing one final frame, a close-up of a newspaper clipping taped to the wall. It read, "Stillwater family moves into restored Hartwell home." The date? 2 weeks ago. Pierce's pulse spiked. She stared at the image, realizing what it meant. The recording had been tampered with recently. But the real question wasn't who recorded it.
Detective Abigail Pierce stood in the half-lit basement, her breath fogging in the chill. The air smelled of wet concrete and mildew. The crime scene techs had peeled back a section of the wall, revealing a narrow tunnel framed by old bricks and reinforced with wooden beams that looked decades old. The opening was just wide enough for a grown person to crawl through. She crouched at the entrance, running a gloved hand along the rough stone. "This wasn't in any blueprint," she murmured. "Not from the original construction, not from the 1972 remodel." Reynolds exhaled slowly beside her. Whoever built it didn't want it to be found. The tunnel sloped downward, disappearing into darkness. A faint metallic sound echoed from within. A slow drip, drip. Pierce's flashlight caught the edge of something on the ground, a small plastic tag, half buried in dirt. She picked it up. Printed on it, faint but legible, "Property of Stillwater Psychiatric Hospital." She froze. That hospital had been shut down nearly 40 years ago, condemned after reports of patient abuse and unexplained deaths. Most of its records were sealed. But it wasn't far. Barely 2 miles through the woods. By mid-afternoon, the news had spread across Stillwater like wildfire. "Tunnel found beneath Hartwell property," the headlines read. Residents gathered at the end of the street, murmuring about the house that had a body count. The Dawsons had left town that morning, escorted quietly out of a back exit at the police station. Reporters camped near the gate anyway, hungry for a photo, a quote, anything. Inside the precinct, Pierce spread the photos from the hidden room across a corkboard, the chair, the Polaroids, the VHS tapes. The timestamps on each tape were spread apart by years, suggesting something systematic, not impulsive. The last tape, labeled 2004, had been the one with Rebecca Keller. But now, as the techs finished digitizing the rest, another disturbing pattern emerged. Each tape corresponded to a missing child from Stillwater. 1989, 1996, 2004. Each one had gone missing around the same time of year, late autumn. Pierce traced a line across the dates, her mind forming a cycle. 7 years apart, always the same season, always the same town. Whoever did this, she said under her breath, was patient. That night, she returned to the house, alone. The Hartwell place was silent except for the low creak of wood. The forensic lights had been switched off, leaving the space in partial darkness. She stood in Evan Dawson's room, the one with the sealed wall. The wallpaper was gone now, exposing the old plaster and the outline of where the tunnel had been hidden. She turned her flashlight on the floor and noticed something the techs had missed. Faint drag marks, leading from the corner of the wall to the closet door. Inside the closet, the back panel had been disturbed. It looked like someone had pried it open recently. She leaned closer, running her light along the edges. Nail scratches. Fresh. She grabbed her radio. "Dispatch, it's Pierce. I'm going back into the tunnel." The passage was narrow, the air stale. Her flashlight beam flickered against damp brick. The deeper she went, the stronger the metallic scent became. Rust, soil, and something faintly chemical. After what felt like 30 feet, she reached a wider chamber. It was lined with wooden shelves, some still holding old medical supplies, glass vials, rusted syringes, and tape recorders covered in dust. On the far wall, an iron door stood half open, leading into another space. Pierce steadied her breathing and stepped inside. The room beyond looked like a cell. Old restraints hung from the wall, a rusted gurney sat in the center, covered by a decayed tarp. She lifted the edge and found not a body but a series of old Polaroids taped beneath the fabric. Her gloved fingers trembled as she peeled one away. The images were newer than the others, not from the 80s or 90s, but within the past few years. And one of them showed a boy with short brown hair sitting in that same metal chair. Evan Dawson. Pierce's heart pounded. She looked at the next photo. It was taken from behind him, as though the photographer was stepping out of the shadows. In the reflection on a small mirror beside the chair, she saw the outline of a man, broad shoulders, balding, wearing a sheriff's badge. She stumbled back, nearly dropping the photo. She fumbled for her flashlight, her breath sharp. "No!" she whispered. "That's not possible!" She backed toward the exit, pulse hammering. Her radio crackled to life, Reynolds' voice coming through distorted by static. "Pierce, you need to get out of there now." "What? Why?" she asked, her voice shaking. "We got results from the fingerprint analysis on the VHS tapes." His tone was tight. "They're fresh prints, not from old handling, and they match someone in the department." She gripped the radio tighter. "Who?" Silence. Then softly, "Sheriff Rourke." The line went dead. The sound came then, faint footsteps echoing from the tunnel behind her, slow, deliberate, growing closer. Pierce flicked off her flashlight and crouched low, pressing her back against the wall. A beam of light flickered down the corridor, a handheld lantern cutting through fog and dust. "Detective?" a man's voice called. Calm. Familiar. "You shouldn't be down here alone." Pierce didn't move. Her hand went to her holster, her pulse thrumming. Rourke's silhouette appeared in the tunnel, his lantern swinging gently. "You're trespassing on sealed property, Detective. That's not protocol." "You were here before. You filmed those tapes." He stopped, the light catching half his face, calm, unreadable. "Careful what you accuse a sheriff of, Detective. You might not like the paperwork that follows." She held up the Polaroid, her gloved fingers trembling. "This one was taken days ago. He's alive, isn't he?" Rourke smiled faintly. "Maybe. Maybe not."
But sometimes people disappear because they're supposed to. You dig too deep, and you start uncovering graves you can't fill. Then, without warning, he raised the lantern and smashed it against the tunnel wall. The light exploded, plunging them into darkness. Pierce's flashlight flared back to life just in time to see him vanish into the deeper passage. She shouted into the radio, "Units to Hartwell property! Officer in pursuit! Suspect armed!" But the signal was gone. The tunnel twisted endlessly ahead, and somewhere in the dark, faint, almost too faint to be real, she heard the sound of breathing. Not from Rourke, from someone else. When backup finally arrived, they found Pierce outside the tunnel entrance, mud on her knees, flashlight gone, eyes wide. She said little, except for one thing that made everyone in the room pause. She's whispered, "There's another chamber down there, and I heard someone calling for help." They re-entered the tunnel, but this time the far end was blocked, the wooden beams had collapsed, the entrance buried. No one found Rourke, and as the officers cleared the debris, they uncovered something new. A locked steel door embedded deeper in the foundation. Fresh paint. On it scrolled in red marker were 3 words. "Not this room." When they finally forced the steel door open, they realized it wasn't a room at all. It was a recording booth.
The steel door groaned as they pried it open. A rush of cold air spilled out, metallic, stale, and far too recent. Detective Abigail Pierce stepped forward with the flashlight, her boots crunching on broken plaster. The beam swept across a narrow space lined with black acoustic foam, a cracked microphone stand, and an old reel-to-reel recorder still spinning, its tape hissing faintly. This wasn't a torture room. It was a recording booth. On the back wall, words were scrawled in chalk. Confessions, 1989 to present. Everywhere she looked, there were tapes, dozens, maybe hundreds, labeled in tight handwriting. Interview A01, B02, C03. Pierce picked one up, the label reading, Evan Dawson, Day 1. Her breath caught. "Reynolds," she called, her voice unsteady. "Get the lab team down here. Every second of this needs to be documented." But when she turned, the tunnel behind her was empty. The tech team didn't arrive for another 30 minutes, and by then, Pierce had already begun listening to the first tape. The crackling hiss faded, replaced by a boy's voice, weak, tired, unmistakably Evans. "Please," he said, "I already told you, I didn't mean to find it. I was just trying to fix my wall." A second voice answered, calm and measured. "Sheriff Rourke's. You shouldn't have touched what wasn't yours. That room was sealed for a reason." Pierce's jaw tightened as she listened. "Why are you recording this?" Evan asked. "For the same reason I recorded all the others. Someone has to preserve the truth." Then came a scraping sound, a chair moving perhaps, followed by a click as the recorder stopped. Pierce set the tape down, her stomach twisting. She looked around the booth again, noting how deliberate everything was. The foam panels, the wired microphone, and the dated but functional recorder. It wasn't a secret dungeon. It was an archive. And someone had been curating it for years. By dawn, the state police had sealed off the property entirely. Every tape, photograph, and VHS was logged as evidence. But the more they uncovered, the less sense it made. Many of the recordings were dated after Rourke's official arrival in Stillwater, meaning he had begun his tenure as sheriff while still maintaining whatever operation had started decades before him. Pierce drove to the old Stillwater psychiatric hospital that morning, the tag she had found in the tunnel still in her pocket. The building sat in ruins beyond the woods, crumbling walls, windows black with rot. But inside, she found records that connected everything. From 1959 to 1983, the hospital ran an experimental program called Project Resocialization, designed to,
correct deviant behavior in minors. Dozens of children were treated there, most for minor offenses, some for truancy or defiance. Many were never released. When the facility closed, the files were sealed. And the name of the head orderly who oversaw the final years of the program? Marcus Rourke. Sheriff Rourke's father. Pierce returned to the precinct with the discovery, her mind racing. She laid the old personnel file on her desk and stared at the family photo attached to it. Marcus Rourke, standing proudly in front of the hospital with his hand on the shoulder of a young boy, a boy who couldn't have been older than 12. David Rourke. The future sheriff. The same eyes, the same stillness. He hadn't created the recordings. He inherited them. By that evening, another tape surfaced from the evidence room. Unlike the others, this one wasn't labeled with a name or date, just a single word. End. Pierce hesitated before pressing play. Static. Then Rourke's voice again, this time quieter, heavier. You think you can erase what people did before you, but the truth has a way of keeping itself alive. My father started something meant to save kids, to make them confess what they did. He thought he was helping them. But when the state shut him down, he brought them here, to this house. A pause, the faint sound of rain against a roof. I wasn't supposed to continue it, but when I joined the force, I realized something. People lie. They always lie. So I kept the program alive just in place. Every few years I'd find another one, someone who fit the pattern, someone who needed to talk. Then a deep sigh. And now you've found it all. Maybe you'll understand someday. Pierce felt a chill crawl up her spine. She reached to stop the tape, but then another voice came through, faint, barely audible. Detective Pierce? It was Evan. Is anyone there? The recording ended with a soft click of the reel spinning out. Within an hour, the state search unit returned to the Hartwell property with ground-penetrating radar. They began scanning the area beneath the basement and discovered what looked like a secondary chamber, one not visible through the original tunnel. When they broke through the soil, they found a small underground space lined with concrete walls and electrical wiring. At the center of the room was a camera on a tripod, and beside it, a chair, just like the one in the hidden room upstairs, only this one wasn't bolted down. On the seat sat a small portable recorder, still running. Pierce pressed play. The recording hissed, then Rourke's voice again, this time softer, heavier. They say confession is good for the soul. Maybe that's true. So here's mine. I didn't kill that boy. He walked into the wall on his own. He wanted to know what his house was built on. He wanted to find the truth. So I showed him. Then the tape cut out. The forensic team later determined that the recording was no more than 24 hours before Pierce entered the tunnel. 2 days later, they found Sheriff Rourke's body. It was discovered at the edge of Stillwater Reservoir, the same body of water that ran beneath the town's old sewer tunnels. His service revolver was missing, but the cause of death was ruled inconclusive. Some thought suicide. Others whispered something darker. Pierce didn't attend the press conference that followed. She sat instead at her desk surrounded by boxes of evidence, staring at the final reel tape she had kept aside. It had no label, no markings, just faint etching along the reel's edge. A symbol, a small compass. She loaded it into the player. This time, there was no voice, no confession, just ambient noise, faint wind, dripping water, and what sounded like the low hum of machinery. Then, a whisper. Not Rourke's, not Evan's, a woman's. "You can still hear us." Pierce froze. The voice continued. "They sealed the walls again, but the tapes, they're still running." And then, the final sound, a soft mechanical click, as if a camera had just started recording. Weeks later, the Hartwell property was scheduled for demolition, but the construction company refused to proceed after several of their workers quit mid-job. They said they could still hear faint whispers in the basement, like a tape looping in the dark. Detective Pierce was reassigned shortly after. She requested to keep the Hartwell case open, but the department classified it as closed with no suspect in custody. Before she left, she packed away the files into evidence storage, except one. The last tape. Sometimes late at night, she swore she could still hear the faint hum of it playing in her head. The same looping sentence, over and over. They sealed the house and buried its history, but some secrets don't die, they wait. If you think this story was dark, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe before the next wall comes down.